Hi guys, welcome back. Welcome back to my channel. So today we're not doing a vlog. We are going to be talking about nursing pay. We're going to be talking about the progression, how much money I made as a new grad versus how much I make now as a nurse educator. Because I kind of feel like nursing school doesn't prepare you for that. Nursing school doesn't really explain pay progression, and I find that a lot of new grads are shocked or surprised how much they make in the beginning because of taxes and whatnot, and the fact that we'll get into that. When we talk about pay progression in nursing, we are usually talking about hospital-based pay and unionized roles. So what does that mean? That means that most likely when you start off in a hospital, when you work in bedside, you're going to be paid based off of a salary grid. And this means that your pay is tied to a step. And that step is directly tied to years of experience and how much you've worked as a nurse. So instead of random raises and pay increases, your pay becomes predictable based off of the number of years you work. So this applies to whether you're an RPN or an RN, even though the grid and the steps are different in terms of pay. However, it's kind of, the process is relatively the same. So let's back up a little bit. So in 2016, I started my first nursing job in the hospital as an RN, and I did 2 days, 2 nights, and then 5 days off in between. And what was I making at that time? I was making $31.45, so $31.45 per hour. And I believe because I had 5 days off, the pay varied every 2 weeks. However, in theory, I would have about 90 hours within a pay period. So let's do the math. So 31.45 times 90 hours, so a full pay, that would have given me a gross of $28.50, so $2,850. Not bad. However, there's something called taxes. There's something called CPP, hoop, pension, union dues, all of those bad, terrible things. And there was a deduction of about $1,000 on every single paycheck. So realistically, my take home was about $1,850 in 2016, working 90 hours in 2 weeks, 45 hours per week. Yes, it varied per paycheck because sometimes I had less hours because of that 5 days off. However, $1,000 in deductions. So fast forward to 2020, when I actually left the hospital, I left making around $37.95, so $37.95 per hour. And so with that, my gross pay was about, I have my notes here, $3,415.50. However, because of all of those things, those deductions, it was about $1,300, $1,200 to $1,300 that was coming out of my paycheck. So that means my take home was about, let's just lowball it, $2,000.50. So I was making about $200, $300 more within the 4 years. I don't even know if that's worth it, to be honest, but that's kind of all that I knew at the time. And can you imagine? I was working 12-hour days, nights. Yes, I had 5 days off. That was amazing. But all of these taxes were coming out of my paycheck. And it's just like, what are we doing? What are we actually doing here? Let's fast forward again. So at this time, it was 2020 and I left bedside. So I left the hospital and I started working for public health. And that was a whole different pay grade. Completely different. The steps were different. I don't even know how they calculate it, but for some reason, I was able to jump more than half the steps when I first started and I got hired. And I started off, I think it was step 8 or 9. Let's just go with 9 at the time. However, I remember I had no public health experience, but for some reason I was able to jump the pay grade. And so when I started, I was making $45.52, and I'm going to pop the grid on the screen. So I started off at step 9. This was a little bit different. I worked less hours in a day, but I worked more days in the week. So I worked 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and had 2 days off. So within a pay period, that was 40 hours per pay. My gross pay was $3,644.80. Amazing. Again, remember we have deductions. So with all of those deductions, my take home was about 2250. Let's just round it off. However, this pay was more consistent. It never really changed unless I picked up overtime, which I did a lot, because it was COVID, obviously. But for the most part, my pay was consistent. So I was bringing around $2,200 every 2 weeks. And mind you, I had no public health experience. At this time, I didn't have a master's. So honestly, if you want to get into public health, it pays great. They work from home, most regions. And yeah, at this time, I was laughing. It was great. It was amazing. But of course, Shanae always gets bored, and I decided to get my master's and get into teaching. And so let's kind of fast forward to what I'm making now. So I teach as a clinical instructor, and I also teach as a professor in class. So because I have my master's, I just have an extra layer of credentials, so I get paid a little bit more. As a professor, I get paid around $97 per hour. However, I don't teach as often. So I teach about 6 hours per week, and bi-weekly I get my pay of 12 hours, right? In addition to that, I also do clinical instructing. I get paid different wages per role because I work for multiple colleges. So on average, that pay is around $72 per hour if I average all of them out. And then I work around 36 hours per week amongst all colleges. So because I work for multiple colleges, I honestly don't even know what my gross pay is, but collectively altogether, bi-weekly, I take home around $5,400. So around 5K, let's just round it down. And that's actually after deductions. So the pay is actually not bad, not terrible at all. Can't complain. However, just keep in mind that I am contracted. So every semester, it's like I'm taking a risk. I don't know if I'm going to get a contract. I don't know if I'm going to get a class because it's based off of enrollment. So it's kind of like a gamble that I'm playing, but we trust God. So overall, I feel like my pay increased because I was being strategic. It wasn't because I was working harder. I was just playing the game. I got my master's. I switched roles. I looked for what paid the most. It's basically working smarter and not harder. I feel like there's also this emotional side to nursing pay. You can love nursing, but also feel underpaid. You can be grateful for your job and your security that your job holds, but also don't want to be committed because, again, you feel underpaid. So comparing yourself to others on TikTok, YouTube, social media in general, comparing yourself to your friends and managing burnout and managing your patients and managing your lifestyle and all of those things, that is very real. Wanting to be paid appropriately doesn't make you less of a nurse. It doesn't make you less of a person. It doesn't make you less caring or committed. So if you're a nursing student, a new grad, or even a seasoned nurse, I would advise that you get familiar with your collective agreement, make sure that you're being paid according to the step and the number of years that you worked. See what an extra course could do to your pay, if it could jump or if it can increase your pay. I know that getting my master's increased my pay significantly. I don't even know where I would be without my master's. It's opened so many doors for me. Also ask HR how the step placement works, right? How often does it increase? How often can you jump a step? I say all of this to say that your starting salary is not your final salary. I definitely strive to make more, and God willing, will make more in the future. I don't think this is the end. I think I am able and have the capacity to make double than what I'm making right now. So nursing pay can feel a little confusing at first. However, I would suggest that you learn to play the game, learn the game, and then learn how to play it after. Not to say that this is game, but like just be more strategic. Be more strategic with the roles that you choose and that you're applying for. Make sure that you're not working harder, work smarter, just so you can save yourself from the burnout. I hope this video helped you a little bit. I hope it gave you some more insight of how pay progression works over time and how much you can and possibly can make as a nurse. I am the first one to say that it's not always about bedside. There's so many doors that can be opened with a nursing degree, especially a master's in nursing. And yeah, I hope you are able to take something from this. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you. We're at 64 followers, so we're trying to make it to 100 by the end of the year. So if you can help me out with that, that would be great.